Now let's move away from Nigerian politics and the case of an opposition. Let's go to Kenya this morning, where authorities have issued a warning about the sale of counterfeit HIV prevention drugs in the country, saying their safety, quality, and efficacy cannot be assured. Now, according to the Pharmacy and Poisons Board, the drugs were in 2 batches falsely labeled as Truvada, a commonly used HIV prevention drug worldwide. The board said it will take stern legal and regulatory action against anyone found trading, distributing, selling, or dispensing from the batches.
With about 1.4 million people living with HIV in Kenya and 1.2 million on antiretroviral therapy drugs, the Kenyan police fear that thousands of counterfeits of Truvada could already be in circulation in the market. Truvada is manufactured by US-based Gilead Sciences Incorporation, which in January this year warned that millions of dollars worth of fake versions of its HIV drugs were being sold in the US, posing dangers to patients.
But of course, their discovery in Kenya, East Africa's commercial hub, shows the Herculean task of tackling fake medicines. Now, to further discuss this development in Kenya, we're joined by Secretary General, Kenya Medical Practitioners, Pharmacists and Dentists Union, Dr. Davji Atellah. Good morning. Thanks for joining us. Great to have you. How worrisome is this? And do you have an idea how long these drugs may have been in circulation? Does the Kenyan government have an idea of how many people may have purchased or currently maybe even using this, drugs?
I think it's very clear that the Pharmacy and Poisons Board was also reacting based on the earlier indications from Gilead that some of their drugs have been counterfeited. And therefore, they went deep into analyzing the different batches that they've been having, of which the batch that they've indicated, the B402 and the B425, which did not pass the packaging and the labeling marks that have been set, were counterfeits, because they indicated that they cannot really ascertain the efficacy of this particular Truvada that was verified by them. And therefore, they gave out a warning to the public regarding this, because sometimes once authorities or different bodies bring these medications for confirmations whether they qualify or whether fit, and then whether they're fit, they go out and again use them. So this warning was just to actually make the public conscious and actually check the batches of the drugs, the retrovirals that they may be using. And that means that at the point of these drugs being at the custody of the board for confirmations or for the laboratory testing, probably a part of them could be already in the market. And that's why the level of damage that could be in existence may not be ascertained, but then it's important for now each and every individual to actually ascertain that if they're using a drug, what batch is it? And also, do they match the right labels? So I think that's why the Pharmacy and Poisons Board has come out very strongly to really caution the public, and also to warn all the wholesalers and the traders that in case you are transacting or getting that particular batch of drugs that have been confirmed to be counterfeit, then you will be propagating the use of the drugs in the society. And one thing that is very clear is that when you use these Truvada or these pre-exposure prophylaxis drugs and they are counterfeit, meaning the efficacy and their usage, the ability to protect you is not ascertained, then there's a higher chance of infection. So this could probably be also give about the figure that was coming out from the National AIDS Board recently, which was indicating this actual increase. So probably maybe the commercial sex workers or people who have multiple partners have been trying to use these, and if the counterfeit actually is in circulation, then that could actually justify why the recent report or statistics that came out this year was indicating a rise in HIV in the country.
Now, I mean, this is quite worrisome news, because if we're hearing that there's a potential of fake Truvada, which is, of course, a pre-exposure prophylaxis in circulation, it's a danger to not just the healthcare practitioners who are exposed to needles daily, to those who share needles, to those who have multiple sexual partners. So now the question is, how do people recognize? Is there a way to sort of find out or verify if the Truvada one has, or maybe a hospital or a Truvada that an organization has or an individual has is original? Is there a mode for verification of the fake from the original?
From the information that was coming from the Pharmacy and Poison Board, they were giving out the label challenge, that the labeling and packaging issue that made them not qualify. And therefore, it's much more easier for individuals to actually look into the batch numbers of the drugs that they may be taking, because almost every package of the drugs always have the batch number written on it. So when you have, when you are using the drugs, then you can check, is the batch number that has been mentioned or that have been publicized the same one that I am using? And in that case, you stop. And also, you do not, whenever you go buying the drugs, you can actually ascertain the batch number of the drugs that you are having. For example, if you look at these, I have an example of antiretroviral I have cited here. You realize that in their lining, they actually indicate the batch number and expiry date of the particular drug. So with that, it's much more easier for somebody to actually ascertain that if in case
I'm
having a drug, then it must be that the batch number that was referred to should not be the one.
Mr. Atellah, we're unable to see. Can you maybe lift up to the camera and show us the area where the batch number would typically be shown?
So for example, in this particular drug, you realize that in the parts we have the lot that is indicated.
All right. Great. Yes, we can see that.
And then the batch also they are together, yes. Okay. So it's almost with all the drugs, whether it's antimicrobial or any of the drugs that from the company that manufactures them, there are batch numbers that identify them that can also be used to track these particular drugs. So that will be the most easier way to identify once an authority has declared a particular counterfeit on the drugs.
All right.
And it means that they were having those batches trying to find whether they meet the qualify.
So I'm hoping that everyone who's watching this goes to check the batches that are written on the batch numbers on their medication and know whether to cease from consuming it. Let's talk about HIV awareness in Kenya. We're counting down the days to World AIDS Day. The 1st of December is where we typically have majority of the conversations. How well would you say Kenya is faring as regards, information, stigma against people living with HIV, and just access to treatment?
I would say that progressively, in terms of the stigma and the consciousness or awareness of HIV has improved over the years, because from the last report, it was indicating that the counties, the western counties of the country, are the regions where the HIV prevalence is still very high, and I think it's mostly based on the culture of the region. But even as much as it was high compared to other parts of the country, the western region, you realize that the uptake of antiretrovirals is quite very high, and also the openness. There is the stigma. There's a great reductions in the stigma to those who are actually living with HIV across the country, and people are able to speak openly. At the moment, the government has been having this program through the USAID that of antiretrovirals, but those who will not opt to get the free ones will also buy them in the pharmacies and in different outlets. And I think that's why even this one was coming out. Also, we have seen a development whereby the testings can also be bought in any of the pharmacy, and people can talk about them. But I think there's still much more to be done, and there's still much more conversation, especially for the youth of the age between 15 to 24, because there they seem to be much more. The incidence is actually indicating higher rates that are in that age group.
All right.
So I think really more conversations and more discussions and more education and empowerment on HIV and prevention measures are still necessary, even as much as a lot has been achieved over the years.
Well, I also wanted to find out, if there are other, health sources or healthcare providers for HIV medication in Kenya besides this particular brand. Is there other brands that patients or people have available to use? That's one. And then when you say, fake drugs, is it that the drug just doesn't work, or it could even be dangerous to the human body?
There are two things that happens for a drug. When most of these particular antiretrovirals, what we call generic drugs, they're not. Some that are generic, which means that the mother company manufactures the drug, then it opens up the drugs once the patent has expired for other factories to manufacture. And what is most important in those particular times is the bioequivalence, is the generic drug that has been manufactured able to really work in the same way like the original parent drug. And mostly that becomes a normal thing. A generic drug and an original drug has no problem. But then the counterfeit comes in when the molecules are expected to actually work in the body do not really meet that particular standard. And in this case, it means that a drug may be sold like Truvada, for example, that we are seeing here, which should be having emtricitabine and tenofovir. Then you realize that in those particular composition, the number, the quantity of the particles or of the active recipients are not enough to really help the patient. And that's why it is always important to ensure that the quantities and the, which we call bioequivalence of every drug is functional. The other thing that happens is that the labeling, you realize that somebody manufactures something that is not really that drug. So, and some could even be placebos. That's why it is very important that every drug that is consumed should be that which is intended for that purpose. And in this case, if it's a counterfeit, it means that when you are using it and the way it needs to be to protect you from getting the HIV, it will stop. Again, we know that Truvada also is used in treatment of hepatitis. So it means that if a patient uses it, somebody who has hepatitis and the drug is counterfeit, then it won't clear the virus. So those are the really concerns in the aspect of having counterfeits. And that's why the authorities have to be very vigilant that the drugs that are manufactured are the actual biomolecules that are expected to have, and that's what is in the market that actually can eradicate the disease that a person is having.
All right.
And also sometimes we realize that due to these counterfeits, in the parts of the antimicrobials, we get to really develop a lot of antimicrobial resistance, which is actually nowadays now spreading across the globe, different parts of the world. As long as you're using a drug that is not meant or that is not qualified to actually treat you.
All right. I want to also use this opportunity for us to shed a little more light on HIV. And I'd like you to share with us, some of you've talked about how Kenya has made a lot of positive moves, has made so much progress, but yet there's much more progress that could be made or that can be made. Let's talk about some of the hindrances or some of the setbacks that might, impede the progress against HIV. What are some of the stigma or what are some of the misconceptions that people have about HIV and AIDS?
First of all, as a country, just the fact that we're in the global south, we have a lot of dependence on the donor for the HIV drugs and for most of the management of the HIV and this particular disease. And that makes, I remember there's a time earlier, 2 years ago, when there was a lot of shortage of the antiretrovirals. So it's also important for the countries in the global south like Kenya to actually look at how do they invest to a certain having these particular antiretrovirals without depending on the donors. But when I look at the question that you asked me on the challenges or the setbacks that exist, I think there's been a very strong something that's called more of a sponsor behavior, where we have the relationship that quite exists strongly between the married people in the society, probably the older males and the older females, and you realize in most of those instances they really result into the increase in the HIV. And why am I saying this? Because a lot of times the youth between 15 to 24 do really not mind about the issues of HIV as much as they care about pregnancy. And this has resulted into that age group always having a lot of increase. And sometimes because of the elderly relationship they're having, or they normally called sponsors, they will be afraid to ask their status. So because in my practice, I've had the cases whereby a young lady will come to the hospital and they will want post-exposure prophylaxis. And when you ask about the partners, they'll be very much afraid to have engaged these persons to have tests with. And see, that means that if this is one out of 10 who are coming to the hospital to get this particular post-exposure drugs, what about those who do not go or who fear to ask the partners about this, but to talk with the partners about this condition? And that will easily result into the spread. Another thing is the notion of those who are taking the antiretroviral medications. Most of them just tend to take it in privacy, tend to hide it. And you see, it is very hard to have adherence when you have to hide in a place to take the drug. So those are some of the things that I believe that if we get to have more conversations and make this condition, or rather HIV, to be seen as just as other conditions, other chronic conditions that that anybody can actually have, then that stigma, that negative thought may actually reduce, and that will then result into the plan that Kenya has, the 1990 plan. That means there's the 90% usage of antiretrovirals, the 90% testing, and the 90% reductions in the viral load of every individual.
This is not a challenge that is peculiar to Kenya. I dare say that is something that we're experiencing all over the continent and maybe all over the world. We need to keep talking about this to let people know that you can live natural, normal, healthy lives regardless of your HIV status. You just need to take your antiretroviral drugs, your CD count will be low, and then you can live a normal life. And then we just need to stop the stigma. Thank you so much, Dr. Davji, Bhimji, Atellah, for joining us this morning. We look forward to having you again.